Good evening, good evening. Yeah, I do best on stages that are covered in confetti, so I'm really excited about that. That's like my vibe. I prefer to dance on stage than talk on stage, so that's amazing. And I just also need to make sure that I'm all dressed up, and I must be honest, a little bit stressful getting dressed to share a stage with Ps Tes Jahnig. Okay? I don't know if anyone else feels that pressure for me, you know? I was like, wow, girls, you got to help me. Come here. I need all the help I can get. And in fact, you know what my teenage daughter said, Jada? She was like, oh, Mom, you look great. Did Dad dress you? So offensive. And Kiara says to me, Mama, I don't think you're going to manage in those heels. You can't talk like that. While she's standing up on points, walking around my room. Yes, Mama, I think you're going to have to change. I'm like, well, if you can do it, I can do it. Amen? Amen. I just copied that from Test. All right, good. So, let me get that to be the right way around, shall I? I was here last Sisterhood at LINC. I'm so glad I was, because what Tess shared on about peace really stood out to me. I loved it. She taught us that peace is a person. So you never have to be without peace, because peace is a person, and his name is Jesus, and you get to know him. And I just found that such a beautiful and helpful thing to take away with me, because we live in kind of a broken world right now at the moment. The Bible says that we are enduring the futility that comes from the consequence of human sin. And many of us know that brokenness. I think if we're honest, all of us know the futility that comes from the consequence of human sin. And as many of you know, on Christmas Eve this last few months ago, our family got to experience some of that brokenness in a very real way. I was supposed to be preaching that night on Christmas Eve, and my husband took the rest of our kids a bit earlier off to church, and Kiara kindly waited for me as I finished getting dressed. We were on the way to the service, on the way to church, and I was turning into the parking across oncoming traffic, and there was a motorbike that was overtaking on the wrong side, so I wasn't able to see him. That hit into the passenger door window, and our whole car jumped sideways. He went flying, was miraculously unhurt on the other side of the car. All the windows smashed, and I turned to Kiara to say, wow, that was close. And as I did that, she fell onto my lap, and I realized that she was bleeding from the head. Somebody passed me a towel through the window and told me I should put pressure on her head where she was bleeding. But as I did so, I felt that her head was softer than it should be, that there was a degree of brokenness to her skull, and so I was careful in how much pressure I put on. When help arrived and the paramedics, I jumped out of the car and stupidly said, I'm okay to preach. I was covered in blood from head to toe. And obviously everybody else knew that that was not the case, that I was obviously just not yet processing what was going on. And they ushered me into the ambulance, and we went off to the casualty. And we were standing around the casualty. There was 12 people attending to Kiara, paramedics. The helicopter paramedic had come running down because he's more qualified, doctors, all sorts of people standing around her. The paramedic that dealt with her first on later told us that he suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder after dealing with her. The doctor that was on duty similarly suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. She wrote us a letter to say, I'm so sorry that I was unable to speak to you when I saw this child in front of me, and I just didn't know how to speak to her parents. We have a specialist physician in our congregation who followed us to the casualty, and he stepped in where the casualty doctor, in shock, was unable to do what she was supposed to do, and he stepped in and helped. And then he came and he put his arms around us, and he started praying, life and not death. Life and not death. And it was only when he said those words that I had any idea of the level of brokenness that we were dealing with. I know that I'm not the only person in this room that is experiencing brokenness. I know that there are parts in your lives, maybe in the lives of someone you love, maybe not today, but I know that I'm not the only one who has experienced brokenness. And I know that you ask, like me, can we still encounter Jesus the way they did in the Bible? Do we still get to encounter Jesus, the peace in a person? Do we still get to, I need him to be real, I need him to be alive. Do we still get to do that today? The doctor explained to us that Kiara, she's 13 years old. She's actually just turned 14. She had fractured her skull. About a palm-sized piece had been broken and gone into her brain, and he was going to have to take her into surgery. This was about 8 o'clock Christmas Eve, and take out some of the bone fragments and repair them and replace the part of the skull that was damaged. And he explained to us that there was obviously risks involved. There was potential. You didn't know what those fragments had damaged. Time would tell when she woke up. And so he suggested that we go home and that he would call us. It was going to be a 5-hour surgery. And so we decided to do that because our other children, being a pastor's family, we do Christmas on Christmas Eve because Christmas morning is very busy for us. And so they had been expecting to open Christmas presents. And they also had no idea what had happened. They had just been ushered off with somebody else. They didn't know why. They thought that Kiara had fainted. They had no idea what the story was. They didn't realize even that it was a car accident. And so we went home and sat them down and explained to them what was going on. We prayed with them, put them to bed, and at about 1 a.m, we received the call that Kiara was coming out of surgery. And so my husband Richard went to receive her out of surgery into ICU, and I stayed at home. And it was the first time that I had the opportunity to be alone with Jesus. I don't know if you know who you think Jesus is at the moment. God, the Father, Jesus, it can be quite confusing. I first found Jesus when I understood a poem that one of his best friends wrote about him and who he was. And the poem goes like this. It's written by John. It's in John 1. And he says, it's not a rhyming poem, so don't wait to listen for the rhyme. It's not there. But it's poetic language, and I love poetic language because it's able to give us something that sometimes our left-handed side of the brain is not quite able to decipher. We can't fit it into a box, and I think the relationship between Jesus and God is like that. It's a little bit confusing. You can't define it. It takes something a bit more artistic in order to understand it. And the poem goes like this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of the world. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We've seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. No one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known. And so I understood from when I first encountered that passage that Jesus was the Word of God. He was literally the expression of God. So as I'm speaking to you now, my words come to you. I don't necessarily have to run over and touch you. You are receiving me as I speak. My words are coming to you. You are getting the living. You're not getting anybody else. You're getting me as you hear my words. And Jesus is the living expression of God. He is available to us. He is God expressed. And this Word of God is still God expressed. By his Spirit, it is still alive, and we're still able to encounter Jesus is the Word. He is the expression of who God is. So when I found myself alone, I needed an encounter with a Jesus that was still alive, that was still real, and could still do miracles. And so I want to share with you just 3 encounters that I had with Jesus in those early days as we dealt with the trauma that we were dealing with, because I desperately want you to know also that Jesus is alive. He is real, so real, and he is still a miracle worker. So at about 1 a.m, I took my little pink Bible and I sat on the bathroom mat. The bathroom mat is not like supposed to be some holy place. It's just that my bedroom is not carpeted, and I feel much better talking to God on the floor. I think it's got something to do with how amazing he is and how nothing I am. It just feels better down there. And then also, at that time, the builders had gone on holiday and our bathroom had no water, and so our bathroom mat was beautiful and new and clean and hadn't actually been used with water before. So it was a very good little prayer mat at the time. So I sat with my Bible. I don't know how you read your Bible. Some people can go, yes, okay, Isaiah 39, got it. I have tried that, and God says the strangest things to me, and I know that He's not talking to me. That does not work for me, almost never. I actually can't think of a single time that has worked for me. What I do is I've got a bit of a knowledge of the person of Jesus that's written down in the Word, and so I'm able to think, where would you speak from now? And in this moment, I felt like Psalms would be a good one. And so I went to Psalms, and then I just start paging through until it comes alive. You know, when my husband walks into the room, there's voices, 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 and then there's his voice, and it comes alive. It kind of like that. And so in this moment, I sat there and I started paging through Psalms, and I came across one that caught my attention that said, keep trusting in the Lord, fix your heart on the promises of God, and you will be secure. And I said, but God, what is your promise? I would love to fix my heart on the promises of God right now. My little girl is in surgery, brain surgery. I'm trusting she's going to be okay, but I would really like a promise from you right now. This is what I read, Psalm 37. In fact, let me turn to it in here. Psalm 37, from verse 3. Keep trusting in the Lord and do what is right in His eyes. Fix your heart on the promises of God, and you will be secure, feasting on His faithfulness. Make God the utmost delight and pleasure of your life, and He will provide for you what you desire the most. Give God the right to direct your life, and as you trust Him along the way, you'll find He pulled it off perfectly. He will appear as your righteousness, as sure as the dawning of a new day. He will manifest as your justice, as sure and strong as the noonday sun. Quiet your heart in His presence and pray. Keep hope alive as you long for God to come through for you. And I felt like God said that my promise is this. You have permission to keep hope alive as you long for God to come through for you. You have permission to keep hope alive. Fix your heart on the promises, but keep hope alive. Now, because the Word of God is a living person, you don't get to pick and choose which parts of that person you like best, right? So when I met my husband, he's amazing, like seriously amazing. But I think I would have dated him a little sooner if it weren't for his nose. But don't tell him I said that. Okay? I'm just being honest with you. But okay, it's like one thing, all right? I mean, it's a big thing, but it's just one thing. He's so handsome. You should totally see him. He's amazing. All right. So when I met him, I had to choose all of him if I wanted him. And so I chose all of him and I got to have him. Now, because the Word is a living person, it's the same thing. I don't get to say, oh, love the fix your heart part and the keep your hope alive part. Going to go with that. But I don't know if you noticed this verse somewhere there in the middle that says this. Make God the utmost delight and pleasure of your life. Make God the utmost delight and pleasure of your life, and He will provide for you what you desire the most. And so I made a decision, sitting, kneeling on that bathroom mat, to be honest, to make God my utmost delight, the desire of my heart, above all else, including my daughter. And I put her on the altar, and I let go. And I said, God, I'm going to hold on to you with both hands as I fix my heart on the promises of God. You know, when you want to swing a child around, you ask them to pass you their hands, and they pass you their hands, but you don't hold their hand because it's likely to slip out of your hand as you swing them around. You actually grasp their arm, and they're holding onto your arm, but really you're holding onto their arm. And it was really like that. As God said, fix your heart, and I reached up with both hands, and I grabbed, but He grabbed my arms, not my hands, and He was holding, and it was really all Him. He was holding me as I was holding Him. And so the first encounter that I wanted to share with you was that Jesus is alive today, because would you put up your hand if that keep hope alive word has struck home for you in the last little while? You see, keep hope alive was not something that I had to carry and breathe life in and try and manufacture. Keep hope alive was a living word. I did not put it on T-shirts and on profile pictures and keyrings around the country, all the way across the globe. There's people in Australia wearing Keep Hope Alive shirts. I did not make that live. The word had life of its own. And to be perfectly honest, I dropped it a number of times. But the word had life of its own. When you encounter Jesus, it is not about words. Jesus is not a word that is written on some meme, written on some encouragement somewhere where you have to try and shake life into it and say, I read this once, it meant something to me. No. When we say Jesus is the word, Jesus is alive. It is a living word. It has life of its own. You do not have to keep the words of Jesus alive. He does that all on his own. Jesus is very much alive today. So the next morning, Christmas morning, we had been told that Kiara would have to stay asleep for a few days just to let her brain rest after the surgery. And so we decided that I would go to the hospital and sit with her as she slept. But Richard was going to take our 6 other children to the Christmas service to be with family at this time. And I was in the room getting dressed. We were all just about ready to go. And I heard a phone call coming through. I heard Richard on the phone. I was sort of half listening to him. He was saying, yes, we do. Yes, I do. I understand. Okay, yes. And then I heard my 12-year-old boy screaming, Mommy, come! And I ran through to the lounge, and I saw my husband drop to the floor on his knees, and he couldn't talk. And I fell to my knees in front of him, and I said, what has happened? What happened? Please tell me what happened. And when he could speak again, he explained that the doctor had called, and Kiara had not responded well to the surgery. Her brain had started swelling, not hemorrhaging. It already had a drain in it that could have drained out blood. It was the brain tissue itself was swelling, and he was asking for permission that we would authorize over the phone that he could rush Kiara into surgery to remove half her skull, to open up her abdomen and put her skull in her abdomen so that they could keep it alive and they could make room for the brain to continue to swell without being too badly restricted from receiving fresh blood and oxygen. So obviously he had given permission over the phone, and we rushed straight up to the surgery, straight up to the hospital. By the time we got there, she was already in. Less than 10 minutes later, we didn't even get to say goodbye. And she had the surgery Christmas afternoon. The doctor contacted us again to say, I'm sorry, it hasn't worked. Her brain pressure, even without the skull, has continued to increase. It is far above the acceptable pressure for her to be able to receive fresh oxygen. Sorry, it's not easy to public speak and be emotional at the same time. She's not receiving proper oxygen. Her brain is continuing to swell. I'm going to take her in for another CAT scan to see if there's hopefully something that I've missed, which there wasn't. Her brain just hadn't responded well. Her injury that had been a localized injury had now become a global injury. The pressure had gone through the brain, hits on the other side of the wall, back again, and so the entire brain was damaged. He said she now has the highest level of brain damage. We've done the highest level of intervention, and it's unfortunately not worked. On Christmas night, during the night, her organs started failing. They had to resuscitate her heart, and on Boxing Day morning, the doctor phoned to say, I'm sorry, there's now the highest probability of the very worst outcome. He had been trying to, his goal as a neurosurgeon was to preserve her brainstem life. Just at the base of your brain, it's outside of the brain itself, so it's not receiving the same amount of pressure, and your brain stem will keep your heart beating and your lungs going. So that was his aim. He said, there's nothing I can do about the rest of her brain, I'm afraid. It was crazy. It just is crazy. I remember this conversation as my husband stood that day holding a clipboard with a red piece of paper on it and asked friends of his, pastors that had flown in from Johannesburg and Pretoria and Cape Town and from around the city of Durban, friends, and he gathered them around and he said, guys, do I sign the do not resuscitate form or not? Her heart has failed once. The doctors explained to us that she will probably be in a vegetative state for the rest of her life. Do we want them to resuscitate if her heart fails again? These kind of crazy conversations. And the trauma, it hits you in waves, you know. You can't permanently be in a state of trauma. Brokenness, we're designed to ignore it some of the time. And sometime during that day, we took all our children in, grandparents, friends, whoever wanted to, really. We were no longer worried about infection. We just let whoever wanted to go in and say goodbye, Kiara's friends. And at one point, somebody arrived to greet us. They walked into the waiting room, and I stood up to say, "Hi, thank you so much for coming." And as I did that, it just hit me again. I just said, "Oh my goodness, I'm going to throw up." And I ran into the bathroom, the public toilets, and I closed the cubicle door, and I just fell down to the floor, and I was just, "Oh God." And I just started to hyperventilate. I couldn't breathe properly. I felt like the ground was falling out from under me. And all I could say was, "Fix your heart. Fix 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 your heart on the promises of God. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. Fix your heart on the promises of God, and He will come through for you. Fix your heart. Keep hope alive as you long for God to come through for you." And as I spoke, as I whispered the words, as I brought Jesus back into the room, He was the most real person I've ever experienced. There were ladies standing at the door, my mom, my husband's mom, my best friend, and they wanted me to open the cubicle door. They wanted to say, "Let us in. Why? You can't cry on your own. You can't be on your own right now." And I just felt they weren't real enough. How could they promise me that they would never leave me and that they would never forsake me? They could do nothing. I needed someone that was far more real than my mom or my best friend or anybody else. I needed somebody who was actually able to be rock solid. And in that moment, I wanted to tell you that Jesus is real and He is rock solid. As my feet landed on Him, He is rock solid. Jesus is alive. And Jesus, I promise you, friends, is the most rock solid person that you will ever depend on. My third encounter with Jesus in those first few days was sitting beside Kiara's bed in ICU. I was looking at her. I pulled the curtain around a little bit. An ICU nurse is permanently watching her, so you're never alone. So I just pulled the curtain around a little bit and crouched in the chair, and I was looking at my little girl lying there with tubes coming out everywhere and the machines breathing for her, and death's roar was so loud in that room. And as death was roaring over her, I knew that the Lion of Judah was standing next to me and roaring back at it. But I didn't know if I could stand the sound of those two roars together. We call Jesus the Lion of Judah because He was from the tribe of Judah, and I think lion is self-explanatory, but death was roaring, and the Lion of Judah was roaring, and I was managing to stand in the middle. And I just said to Him, "God, how can you bear it? How can you bear to watch me like this? You know how I'm feeling watching her. You've watched your own son suffer. And I'm watching my daughter suffer. But you're also watching me suffer. And I'm your child. How can you bear it?" And I started to page through this Bible again. And as I paged through Romans, the strangest things started to happen. The roar of death started to get dimmer and dimmer as Jesus started to heal my eyesight to be able to see into eternity, to be able to see into heaven. I just was reading through Romans, and I began to see beyond what was in front of me. So I wanted to read it to you, what I was reading then. It was from Romans 8. And it says this: "I'm convinced that any suffering we endure is less than nothing compared to the magnitude of glory that is about to be unveiled within us. The entire universe is standing on tiptoe, yearning to see the unveiling of God's glorious sons and daughters. For against its will, the universe itself has had to endure the empty futility resulting from the consequences of human sin. But now, with eager anticipation, all creation longs for freedom from its slavery to decay and to experience with us the wonderful freedom coming to God's children. To this day, we are aware of the universal agony and groaning of creation, as if it were in the contractions of labor for childbirth. And it's not just creation. Even us, who have already experienced the first fruits of the Spirit, also inwardly groan as we passionately long to experience our full status as God's sons and daughters, including our physical bodies being transformed. For this is the hope of our salvation. But hope means that we must trust and wait for what is still unseen. For why would we need to hope for something that we already have? So because our hope is set on what is yet to be seen, we patiently keep on waiting for its fulfillment. The best analogy that I can give you to try and understand what happened in that moment for me is quite outdated, and I'm aware that most of the younger people would probably not have experienced this. But we used to have, when I was a teenager, 3D posters. And so it's nothing like the movies today where you can see the picture, but it's the red and green, I think, are a little bit off, but when you put the glasses on, then you can see 3D. Okay, it's nowhere near as fancy as that. It was a poster that was kind of just a mush of colors, and really, you could see absolutely nothing. There was just a mushy mess. But if you keep this poster here on your wall, because that's really a cool thing to do when you're a teenager, is to have these 3D posters on your wall, then you have to try and look way beyond and focus at this point. And if you can look through the poster and through the mess of colors and focus on that point, then an image starts to appear in the mess. And very often it was the Eiffel Tower that was quite far. It was like quite in the distance. And that was quite an easy picture to see because your focal point was there, but the Eiffel Tower was sort of just short of your focal point. But there were other times where if you were an experienced 3D gazer, then you could look in the far distance and a face would appear here. But those ones were really tricky because you would be looking in the far distance and then the face would start to appear. And obviously, the first thing you do is pull your eyes here so that you can see the face properly. But then it goes all blurry again and you can just see that mess of colors. So you have to try and keep your gaze focused on the far game. If you can see my analogy, what I was looking at, it did not closely resemble a picture that was in line with what God wanted for our lives. It was a mess. It was my daughter broken. Her skull was in her stomach. It was not what was supposed to be happening. But as I looked through this mess at the long game and started to see eternity and started to see the hope of our salvation, I started to see a picture and it started to come into focus. As Kiara began to heal and began to improve, I kept wanting to bring my gaze to today or to tomorrow or to this week or this month's healing. But whenever I did that, I would start to panic and be afraid and think, she still has to have another surgery. She still has to have the skull put back again. She's not quite 100%. What do we do? And so I would have to keep learning to remember what I saw in that moment, to go back and look at the long game, because that's when the picture came into focus. It was almost easier to focus on our healing when it comes in heaven than when it's something that we are going to be walking out today. I wanted to read to you, almost just to prove that I'm not lying, that really is what I felt in the moment, what I wrote to Kiara in that moment as I was praying. I keep a journal for each of my children. I'm hoping that by the time they're adults, I'm going to be a really famous author, and so it's handwritten, because I thought that would be like really special. That was a really great idea when I had 2 kids. I now have 7. It's really bad. Some of them I haven't written in 5 years, but anyway. So, Kiara, my everything, I have loved you with an everlasting love. You are beautiful in every way. There's been an accident. You were hit in the head. My darling, I'm so sorry. I always used to think it would be such a waste to lose a child. All the time and effort to pour things into them wasted. Unrealized potential. But I don't feel that way now. Nothing about your 13 years has been a waste. Not a day. You are brilliant in every way, and every moment we spend sharpening that brilliance has glorified God. You have blessed me every day of your life. You have brought blessing and shown the glory of God every day to everyone who knows you. My biggest fear is that you would not be able to dance again. It would be so painful to watch you experience that pain. But God says, don't say Kiara's no for her. He knows what you can handle. He has asked me to keep hope alive. I didn't know what to hope for that I could be sure of, but now I know. I can be 100% sure that the outcome of this ordeal is God's plan. Nothing is being stolen. You are completely covered and protected by prayer, and the outcome is being determined by a kind, merciful, and loving God. My hope is in that, and it is sure. I felt like on that very first day, when I was on that sacred bathroom mat, that I was given a little seedling of hope in a handful of manure. And you are so welcome to insert whatever word you would like instead of manure. Because really, I was holding a handful of manure. But there was a seedling of hope. And it reminded me of when Kiara was born, it was the rage to have newborn photo shoots with a naked newborn baby. And Richard was holding this really tiny, cute little Kiara in a ball in his hand, about to take a picture, when she pooed through his fingers. And it went pouring through his fingers onto the floor. And he turned to me and said, "Did you see that?" And I said, "Yes, love, I'm sorry, she pooed." And he said, "No, did you see? I didn't drop her." I'm so glad that is an achievement for you, love. Well done. Because sometimes it is easy to drop hope when it's given to you in a handful of manure, even though it is the most precious gift that you've been given. But that day, when God healed my sight, that my vision was no longer 20/20, but infinity vision, that I could see clearly into the distant future, He showed me where to plant the hope I'd been given on the first night. We don't plant hope just behind the poster, the picture that we want for tomorrow, because that is in a place where there's still the ability for that hope to be destroyed. There's still the ability for that hope to be damaged. There's still the ability for it to be knocked over by somebody else, because we are still living in a world where we are experiencing the empty futility that results from the consequences of human sin. If we want our hope to stay alive, we need to plant it in eternity, the only soil where it can last forever. And really, ladies, all I want for you to take away from tonight is that if you want Jesus, if you need Jesus tonight, if you need an experience, an encounter with Jesus in your life, I promise you that Jesus is alive. He is so real, and He still does miracles. Miracles of healing eyes so that we can see correctly, as well as the crazy miracle of bringing heaven into today. Many of you know that as we looked and kept our gaze on to eternity, and the picture came into alignment, for us, for Kiara, that picture was for today. As Kiara is doing pose turns around the house, those are this, like 10 of them, all the way around the house, as she is doing her Rubik's Cubes and reading her books and doing whatever else she does, it was for now. But we have to keep our vision on eternity. Jesus is a miracle worker, and He wants to do miracles in your lives. As we keep our vision focused on eternity, He brings heaven forward. Sometimes it's a little bit forward. Sometimes it's all the way forward until today. But Jesus does the miracles as we focus on Him in eternity. And so really, I just wanted to end today, to end tonight, to say to you, good news. Peace is a person. Tess was right. That person you may still encounter today, and his name is Jesus.